During the early medieval period, Ireland was a beacon of artistry, learning, and spiritual devotion, earning itself the title the Land of Saints and Scholars. One such thinker to emerge from the country's flourishing monastic culture was John Scotus Eriugena, a 9th century theologian, poet, and philosopher. John Scotus embodied both saint and scholar, bridging the logic and rationality of the ancient Greeks with Christian theology and spirituality. In doing so, he developed a philosophy which spanned continents and blended centuries of intellectual tradition, creating a remarkable synthesis between philosophy and faith that continues to resonate to this day. John Scotus's seminal work, Periphyseon, or On the Division of Nature, stands as one of the most profound and ambitious achievements of medieval thought. Within his masterful exploration of God, creation, and humanity, John Scotus argues that through deep contemplation and active participation in both the natural world and sacred scripture, we can experience God's essence and make the journey toward reunification with our divine source. John Scotus's unique form of rational mysticism was deeply influenced by the Greek philosophy Neoplatonism, and specifically the concept of emanation and return. Neoplatonism argues that every aspect of creation is an individual manifestation or emanation of the One, the singular, unknowable source of all things, which is synonymous to God in religious thought. John Scotus contended that God's ultimate nature transcends all human categories of thought and is fundamentally unknowable. He asserted that God's essence is so far beyond human comprehension that even describing God within the categories of either being or non-being was inadequate. This approach is known as apophatic or negative theology, a practice of describing God through negation and identifying what God is not, rather than what God is. In using this approach, John Scotus emphasized that language and human concepts are inherently limited and cannot capture the ineffable nature of God, which exists in a state of absolute mystery beyond all human understanding. However, John Scotus asserted that through humanity's unique capability to reflect upon and comprehend divine wisdom, we can come to know and experience God through his physical manifestations, or theophanies. These theophanies are tangible, presently occurring manifestations of God, such as nature and religious scripture, which allow us to engage with and experience God's essence. This spiritual ascent was termed theosis, meaning to be made divine, and can be achieved through a deep apprehension of these theophanies. John Scotus claimed that these manifestations serve as a bridge between the infinite one and the finite human mind, enabling us to perceive divine truth in forms we can understand. For example, he argued that through a rational contemplation of nature, one of the purest manifestations of God's essence, we are directly experiencing reflections of the divine source. The feeling of contented stillness we receive in the presence of nature is a momentary glimpse of unity with the One from which all things emerge. John Scotus also argued that Holy Scripture is a form of theophany, or manifestation of God's divine essence. He believed that the biblical texts were allegorical, symbolic representations of deeper truths about God and the nature of reality. In this way, religious scripture becomes an indirect means through which God communicates his divine nature to humanity. For example, John Scotus uses the story of God appearing to Moses as a burning bush, which symbolically reflects God's capacity to be comprehended in the physical world and illuminate human understanding. This interpretation reflects John Scotus's view that nature and scripture together reveal aspects of the divine order and highlight the soul's ability to contemplate the divine and ascend towards God. John Scotus also describes the human mind as a theophany, given our unique capacity to contemplate our own existence, as well as to receive and comprehend divine wisdom. Since all of creation, including humanity, is a manifestation of the divine, our ability to self-reflect through meditative and philosophical practices is in fact a process of the divine's self-revelation. According to John Scotus, each of us is an individual expression of God, an aspect of the One experiencing itself through the lens of human consciousness. Thus, by contemplating our own existence, we participate in the unfolding of divine knowledge and move closer to unity with the ultimate source. John Scotus argued that as we grow in spiritual wisdom and moral purity, we become increasingly capable of receiving these divine insights and consequently align closer to God. In other words, our ability to comprehend and understand the theophanies as reflections of the divine is relative to our proximity to the One. Periphyseon was a bold and visionary synthesis of philosophy, theology, and mysticism, and thus controversial within Christian thinking. John Scotus's ideas were essentially pantheistic, the belief that God is not a distinct entity from creation as traditional Christian doctrines dictate, but instead is identical with it. Consequently, Periphyseon was eventually banned by the Church in the 13th century, 400 years after John Scotus's time. Nevertheless, John Scotus's work had a significant impact on the landscape of Christian theology, influencing thinkers such as Anselm of Canterbury, who sought to integrate reason with faith, and Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic who believed in moving beyond rational knowledge to experience union with the divine. Periphyseon also experienced numerous revivals throughout history, in particular during the Renaissance and Reformation periods, as scholars and thinkers were inspired by its unique synthesis of philosophy with theology. More recently, Periphyseon gained renewed interest during the 19th and 20th centuries by philosophers such as Hegel, as well as scholars who began to re-examine medieval texts. The perpetual revival of John Scotus's work reflects the timeless wisdom that can be found within his ideas. These scholars across the centuries were drawn to something that deeply resonated with them, perhaps because of his holistic vision of God, creation, and humanity as interconnected aspects of a singular, unified reality rather than as isolated categories. Perhaps this enduring fascination lies within this ultimate truth, that we are all reflections of the One, individually experiencing and revealing our divine source through every aspect of our being.